Hello everyone, my name is Qinlin. It is a great honor for me to participate in the AI and the Study of Antiquity conference at Rutgers University. Unfortunately, I am not able to attend the conference in person. I am very glad, however, to be able to join you online. Due to unexpected circumstances, my flight was canceled and I am currently in the Middle East. Because of this situation, I am not certain whether I will be able to join the discussion live on the day of the conference. For this reason, I have recorded this presentation in advance. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me. I would be very happy to continue the conversation. I sincerely hope that one day I will have the opportunity to meet you all in person. Let us begin by opening an archive. If we examine the private records and manifestos of 19th century antiquarians, we find a shared, fundamental obsession, the meticulous excavation of linear time. The historian's brush sweeps away the dirt of the present to reveal the bedrock of the past. Time, in this traditional archival sense, is an arrow. It is sequential, stratified, and stubbornly chronological. Fast forward to our current era, and we are presented with a very different kind of manifesto. Today's technology narratives introduce artificial intelligence as the ultimate historical savior. When we look at pioneering projects like DeepMind's Ithaca, which brilliantly restores missing texts on ancient Greek inscriptions, we are told that the AI is acting as a digital archaeologist. The prevailing consensus in the digital humanities treats these generative models as highly sophisticated restoration tools. We feed them fragments and they fill in the gaps. They repair the ravages of time. But I am here today to invite you to look at a different set of archives, the outputs of generative image models, and to propose a radically different narrative. What if AI is not repairing the past at all? What if, instead, it is folding it? This brings us to the core concept of my talk today, chronological drift. Through my research, I have found that when we ask a generative AI to envision the ancient world, it does not simply retrieve a pristine, historically accurate image from a digital vault. Instead, it engages in a profound act of temporal misclassification. It takes aesthetics from our distant future, the sleekness of cybernetics, the complexity of modern alloys, and seamlessly weaves them into the fabric of antiquity. It misclassifies the future as the ancient. So, the central question we must grapple with today is this. When an artificial intelligence completely lacks a human sense of time, when it has no concept of what a century feels like or how civilizations linearly rise and fall, how does it redefine antiquity purely through statistical features? If history is no longer an arrow, but a flattened plane of data, what exactly are we looking at when the machine shows us the past? To understand this, we have to step out of the historian's library and descend into the physics of the machine itself, a place known as the latent space. To understand this chronological drift, we must temporarily leave behind the physical archives of parchment and stone and enter a completely different kind of repository, the latent space of generative diffusion models. When we interact with systems like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, it is tempting to imagine that they possess a massive internal library of historical images, a digital filing cabinet organized by century or dynasty. But mathematically, this is a fiction. Diffusion models do not store pictures. They store statistical probabilities and relationships. They learn by destroying images with noise and then figuring out how to reverse that process. The terrain where this knowledge is held, the latent space, is a high-dimensional mathematical topography. Crucially, this topography has no temporal axis. There is no timeline here. It is fundamentally an atemporal terrain. In this space, ancient is not an era. It is merely a high-dimensional vector tag, and futuristic is just another tag. In our human chronological reality, a cybernetic exoskeleton and a Han Dynasty ceremonial bronze are separated by thousands of years. But in the latent space, how are they mapped? They are mapped by statistical aesthetics. If a futuristic concept and an ancient artifact share specific aesthetic dimensions, perhaps a high degree of structural complexity, a sense of alien exoticism, or intricate geometric patterning, their mathematical vectors will converge. They become neighbors. This requires a profound shift in how we understand historical transition. If we look at human history through the lens of Thomas Kuhn, we see chronological successions, one scientific or cultural paradigm replacing another over time. Time separates them. However, the architecture of generative AI operates entirely differently. It does not think in Kuhnian paradigm shifts. Rather, it behaves much more like Bruno Latour's actor network theory. In the latent space, history is not a sequence, it is a network of proximity. Things are connected not because they happened at the same time, but because they share overlapping attributes in a flattened network. Because the machine cannot comprehend the passage of time, it collapses these mathematically adjacent points. It grabs the intricacy of a modern spaceship and the patina of a Roman sculpture because, in its mathematical darkroom, they are right next to each other. The machine is not making a mistake. It is perfectly executing a topological calculation. But what happens when this mathematical proximity is suddenly rendered back into pixels? What kind of artifacts does this atemporal terrain produce? To answer that, let us examine the actual synthesized evidence. Welcome to the visual archive of the latent space. Over the course of my research, I conducted an extensive series of experiments using text-to-image models like Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. I approached these outputs not as mere technological curiosities, but as primary documents, a new kind of synthetic artifact. By systematically prompting these models to generate scenes of antiquity, I cataloged what I call the morphology of anachronism. What emerges from this archive is a consistent, highly structured phenomenon. We can observe this chronological drift, manifesting across three distinct morphological categories. The dislocation of materiality first. Let us look at the material level. When tasked with rendering an ancient Chinese or Greek vessel, the algorithm correctly retrieves the semantic tag of ancient and frequently applies the visual texture of oxidation, a bronze patina. However, beneath this artificial aging, the underlying structural rendering often possesses the specular highlights, tensile strength, and brushed finish of a 21st century aerospace alloy. The AI conflates the idea of age with the physics of modern metallurgy. It applies a mathematical rust over a titanium chassis. We witness a profound collapse of geometry. In this example, the model was asked to generate a Han Dynasty ritualistic artifact. Notice the structural lines. Instead of the historically accurate, heavy, grounded, and compartmentalized geometry of Han bronzes, we see continuous aerodynamic curves. The model has imported the modernist industrial streamline aesthetic of the 1930s or even futuristic sci-fi vehicle designs, misinterpreting these sleek geometries as the solemn, elevated aesthetics of ancient ritual. The future's speed has been mapped onto the past stillness. The infiltration of futuristic color. Finally, there is the infiltration of color. When generating ancient Egyptian murals, the earthy pigments of ochre, lapis lazuli, and soot are frequently hijacked. In their place, we see the stark, high-contrast bleed of cyberpunk neon, cyans, magentas, and synthetic purples, because ancient mysticism and futuristic cyberpunk often share a high-dimensional neighborhood based on exoticism and high visual complexity. The model cross-contaminates their color palettes. The future literally bleeds into the pigment of the past. If we treat these images as an archive, we must draw a crucial conclusion. When we see a Han artifact shaped like a spaceship or a Roman statue glowing with neon, our instinct is to dismiss it as a hallucination, a random bug in the machine. But my phenomenological analysis proves otherwise. These are not random errors. They are highly stable, mathematically reproducible stylistic patterns. They are the true, unvarnished physics of how artificial intelligence perceives time, not as a sequence of eras to be respected, but as a palette of aesthetic features to be infinitely collapsed and recombined. If these morphological mutations, the titanium bronzes, the streamlined Han artifacts, the neon Egyptian murals are not random glitches, then what exactly are they? I propose that in the realm of epistemology, we must stop treating these synthetic anomalies as mere bugs waiting for a software patch. Instead, we must treat them as diagnostic windows. They allow us to peer directly into the cognitive boundaries of artificial intelligence. What we are diagnosing here is a profound case of what philosophers call the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. The generative model mistakes its abstract, statistical map of aesthetics for the concrete, lived territory of human history. It assumes that because two concepts share a mathematical coordinate in the latent space, they must belong to the same historical reality. To formalize how this misplaced concreteness operates, I have structured these phenomena into a theoretical framework, which I call the 3 pillars of algorithmic time. These are the governing physics of the AI's historical imagination. First, dislocated chronology. Time, in the machine, is completely unmoored. The chronological anchor that keeps the 21st century separated from the 1st century is severed. History is no longer a sequential timeline, but a floating repository of disconnected aesthetic fragments waiting to be magnetically drawn together by a user's prompt. Second, latent era synthesis. The AI does not retrieve, it synthesizes. By collapsing mathematically adjacent vectors, the algorithm effectively invents eras that never existed. It creates a synthetic antiquity, a hyperreal past composed of statistically probable pixels rather than archaeologically recovered atoms. Third, future-past leakage. Because the latent space is heavily populated with our contemporary anxieties, futuristic visions, and sci-fi aesthetics, these modern data points inevitably leak backward. The future acts as an aggressive solvent, bleeding into and rewriting the visual boundaries of the ancient world. This brings us to a profound epistemological provocation. Think back to the DeepMind Ithaca project I mentioned at the beginning. If the digital humanities blindly embrace the narrative that generative AI is a restoration tool, if we begin to trust these models to fill in the missing pieces of our fragmented past, what are the consequences? We risk collectively accepting a flattened view of history. We risk replacing the friction, the gaps, and the rugged linear truth of the human archive with a smooth, synthetic, and ultimately futuristic illusion of the past. We are not uncovering history. We are overwriting it with our own present-day data. By opening the traditional archive, a place where time is an arrow and history is built layer by chronological layer. We then descended into the latent space of generative AI, where that arrow is broken, and centuries are folded into a flattened topography of aesthetic data. We have seen the evidence, the titanium bronzes, the futuristic geometries of ancient rituals, the cyberpunk palettes of Egyptian antiquity, and we have understood the physics behind them, the dislocation of chronology, the synthesis of latent eras, and the aggressive leakage of the future into the past. So, where does this leave us as researchers, historians, and scholars of the humanities? It leaves us with an urgent need to build new epistemic defense mechanisms. I propose that the most critical tool we must develop in the era of generative AI is not a better algorithm, but a new critical posture, temporal vigilance. Temporal vigilance means radically changing how we evaluate artificial intelligence in the digital humanities. When we look at models like Ithaca or Midjourney, we can no longer afford to merely assess their capacity for reconstruction. We must rigorously and skeptically interrogate their profound capacity for invention. We must recognize that when we ask a machine to visualize the ancient world, it is not digging into the soil of the past. It is mining the anxieties, the science fiction, and the technological aesthetics of our present and future. Generative AI does not remember history, it hallucinates it. If we lack this temporal vigilance, we risk a silent catastrophe in our archives. We risk transforming the human past into a mirror that only reflects our own futuristic obsessions. The physical archive, with all its friction, its silence, and its chronological distance is epistemologically isolated, but it is real. Let us not replace the difficult truth of the past with the smooth, synthetic anachronisms of the latent space.
We'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. André Rehbinder. Dr. Rehbinder has been an associate professor of classics at Paris Nanterre University since 2019. His research interests are Plato's style and its relationship with argumentation, as well as studying Plato's engagement with lyric poetry and rhetoric, more broadly working with an interest in the ancient literary criticism and the philosophy of language. He is currently preparing a monograph on the Phaedrus with Cambridge University Press. He is here this morning to present his paper titled Studying Plato's Style with the Help of AI. Please join me in welcoming him.
So thank you very much for this invitation, for the organization of the conference. I'm very happy to be here. And there's two authors of this paper, so myself and my colleague Constantin Philippenko, which has a PhD in machine learning from the École Polytechnique, and which is responsible for all the technical aspects. I think he's now in the remote audience, and if you have very technical question, you can maybe address him. So, studying Plato's style with the help of AI. Plato's style seems to present a particular difficulty for those who wish to study it using AI because of its plasticity. Indeed, Plato's style is constantly different from itself. The most obvious sign of this diversity is the use of dialogue, whereas a lively dialogue, carefully staged, characterizes the so-called Socratic or early dialogues. The text usually considered to belong to the final period of Plato's work, such as the Laws, are marked by a fading of dialogue in favor of long monologues, only rarely interrupted by brief interventions from the audience. Further, within a single dialogue, exchanges consisting of short replies alternate with long developments. And even within these longer developments, argumentative passages are followed by mythical narratives or by descriptions. Finally, Plato imitates the style and language of the characters he makes speak. He has sophists speak like sophists, young people like young people, intellectuals like intellectuals, priests and poets as such. Socrates himself, whose language is reputed to be the simplest possible, that of conversation in the agora, sometimes borrows the expressions of poets and physicians, occasionally within the same passage. Yet, the tasks most often requested of AI by philologists and linguists are, on the one hand, to imitate the style of an author after learning its regularities in order to fill a lacuna or discuss a textual reading, and on the other hand, to classify a text, that is, to predict its attribution to a particular author, again on the basis of recurring stylistic features. For both tasks, the plasticity and diversity of Platonic style introduce a statistical noise capable of distorting the results, or even calling into question the very possibility of using machine learning. The aim of this paper is to show through the two specific cases how and under what conditions AI can provide heuristic value for the study of Plato's style. The two examples concern the classification of controversial texts, either within or outside the corpus Platonicum, by means of stylometry, whose capabilities have been greatly increased by AI. First, I discuss the method and conclusions of the recent article by Thomas Poinches, who, after conducting the largest stylometric study carried out to date on the Platonic corpus, concluded that the Menexenes is inauthentic. Second, I propose a different method for examining the authenticity of the speech attributed to Lysias in the Phaedrus, commonly called the Eroticos.
Okay. Should we be advancing your slides?
No, it will be now. It's okay. The first slide is very important, sorry. The authenticity of the Menexenus first part. Thomas Conches clearly situates his study within the tradition of stylometric research, citing Campbell, Dittenberger, Billy, and Ritter, who all carried out their calculation before the appearance of digital tools, and then Ledger, the first scholar able to make use of such tools. In each case, Conches indicates the number of stylistic features tested by his predecessors. Campbell and Dittenberger tested 8, Billig 14, Ritter 43, Ledger 37 features. Furthermore, only Ledger compared the Corpus Platonicum with other works, those of 6 prose writers from the 5th and the 4th centuries BC. Drawing on Perseus, OJL, and first 1K Greek projects, Thomas Conches assembled a corpus of about 800 works, spanning the first millennium of Greek literature, totaling roughly 22,250,000 words. By refusing from the outset to compare the Corpus Platonicum with works traditionally considered close to it chronologically and culturally, he sought to avoid introducing an a priori bias into his statistical study. He further claims to have conducted his analysis on 225 stylistic features and combinations of measures. In reality, the stylistic phenomena observed can be largely be reduced to 2: lexical frequency and the recurrence of sequences of 4 identical characters. So we called it character forgrams. By varying the number of the most frequent words and character sequences and combining the measures with several statistical methods, he ultimately produces 225 indicators. The results he finds are, in his view, conclusive. 201 on the 225 indicators classify the Menexenus outside the Corpus Platonicum. And among the 12 most effective indicators, 9 produce the same classification. In an effort to, I quote, make the results more tenable for philologists working qualitatively, end quote, Conches adds to the purely numerical data a study of lexical outliers. These are words whose frequency in the Menexenus is above the upper quartile or below the lower quartile of the average frequency in the Corpus Platonicum, with a deviation equivalent to 1.5 times the interquartile range. He thus finds that among the 25,000 most frequent words in the Menexenus, 294 are outliers. Focusing on the few most frequent words in both corpora, those that appear at least once every 500 words, he arrives to a remarkable result. 4 very frequent words, de, en, tous, and kai, are clear outliers, distinguishing the Menexenus from the Corpus Platonicum, and we finally arrive to the second slide. So you see the de, tous, en, and kai, and the little red triangle is the Menexenus value. He then relates the frequency of chi and the rarity of de in the Menexenus to conclude that, I quote, the fact that chi is far more frequent and de is far less frequent in the Menexenus than in the Corpus Platonicum as a whole shows a different preference for connecting parts of sentences that are on the same level. Thus, according to Conches, the stylometric data clearly exclude the Menexenus from the Corpus Platonicum. However, they do not clearly link it to the work of any other author. Conches mentions Lucian, admitting that it is impossible because the dialogue was written before his birth, and Xenophon, specifying that the data are not conclusive. In my view, Conches' study convincingly highlights 2 features of the style of the Menexenus: its singularity within the Platonic corpus and the particularly frequent use of chi combined with the relative rarity of de. However, these observations are not sufficient to prove that the dialogue is not by Plato. To establish such a conclusion, these traits would have to result exclusively from authorial idiosyncrasy, that is, from Plato's habitual tendency to prefer certain words over others, especially for coordination. This tendency, which can be called an idiolect, characterizes the language of every speaker in every situation and allows them to be identified, just as the ups and downs of handwriting allow a writer to be recognized. It generally does not obey a conscious intention, which makes it all the more effective for identification. However, in certain situations of enunciation, other motivations take on decisive importance in explaining the speaker's use of a given word. In a literary work, especially, stylistic choices are not solely governed by the authorial tendency, but also by purely aesthetic motivations, the literary genre on the one hand, and the expected effect on the reader on the other hand. The Menexenes is a hybrid work, both philosophical and literary. It stages the meeting between Socrates and Menexenes, and then the funeral oration that Socrates claims to borrow from Aspasia. Socrates delivers it in an aesthetic rather than a purely civic context, since he offers it to Menexenes' aesthetic appreciation. Thus, conscious study seems to me to confuse style in the sense of an individual's unique expression with the style in the sense of the work's own language specific to the literary work, since he explains all the characteristics of Menexenes by the first factor. This confusion, in my view, is the first bias in his study. The second bias seems to me to lie in the way conscious defines the unit of measurement of style. Conscious takes the work as the minimum unit of measurement of style. It can measure style of larger units, the style of an author being that shared by his or her various works, the style of a genre being that shared by several authors. He thus compares the style of the Menexenes with a group of the orators to show that the frequency of Kai cannot be explained by, I quote, a genre signal, as Ledger believed. However, the minimal unit he chooses, the work, prevents him from taking into account subgenres, which do not necessarily characterize a complete work, but sometimes only a part of it. In our case, the central part of the Menexenes, the speech that Socrates claims to borrow from Aspasia, belongs to a subgenre of rhetoric, epidictic oratory, and to a subcategory of this subgenre, the funeral oration. In the classical period, the main surviving funeral orations are sometimes transmitted as complete works, the speeches of Lysias, Demosthenes, and Hyperides, or as part of larger work, the speech of Pericles in Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, and Socrates' Aspasia speech in the Menexenes. In addition, there is a short fragment of a funeral oration attributed to Gorgias. I therefore propose the hypothesis that the unique style of the Menexenes within the Corpus Platonicum can be explained by its generic classification as a funeral oration. To demonstrate this, Constantin Philippenko and I established the following protocol. We formed two classes, one consisting of the Corpus Platonicum and the other of surviving funeral orations from the classical period, excluding the Menexenes from both sets. We then defined two parts within the Menexenes, the dialogue section, prologue and epilogue, and on the one hand, and the funeral oration on the other. Next, we studied the stylistic proximity between the two parts of the Menexenes and the two sets using the TF-IDF method for words 2, 5 grams. That is, by observing the sequences of 2, 3, 4, or 5 words that were most frequent within a text and least common across different texts. We first conducted the study without dividing the text into parts of equivalent size, then by dividing all the text into 1,200 word segments in order to compare the elements of comparable size. There are still some much smaller segments which correspond to the remainder after a division into multiples of 1,200. Finally, we plotted the results on a diagram using the TSNE method. The results seem to corroborate our hypothesis. In the first diagram, here, maybe we have to put it, yes. Where the points correspond to text of different size, not divided into comparable sections, the central speech of Melexenes form a group with contemporary examples of funeral orations, except for Pericles' speech in Thucydides, which appear to form an isolated island. Our foot, it is closer to certain Platonic dialogue. So here's the epitaphios, the remaining funeral oration. Here is the central part of the Melexenes. Here is the Pericles oration. And here is the dialogue part of the Melexenes. Conversely, the dialogue section belongs to the Platonic scatterplot. In the second diagram, figure 3, where texts are divided into a 1,200 word section, the result is even clearer here. Oh, it doesn't work anymore. Yes. Most of the Melexenes oration, excluding a small section of 361 words at the end, belongs to a scatterplot that includes almost all contemporary funeral oration, including that of Pericles. The dialogue part, on the other hand, is clearly within the Platonic cluster. So here you have the discursive, the speech section of Melexenes, and here you have the dialogue sections of Melexenes, and this is the Platonic works. Finally, we ask the machine to classify the Melexenes using the decision tree method after training it to predict the two classes, Plato and Epitaphios. When the texts are considered as a whole, the machine predicts Plato based on a single criterion, the frequency of tone ergo. So if the texts are not splitted. On the other hand, when the texts are divided into passages of comparable size, Epitaphios is predicted based on 6 criteria. Yeah. The first 3 of these criteria are expressions that contain the conjunction kai, tekai, dekai, and gekai. Here again, these results seem to consistent with the hypothesis that the stylistic singularity of the Melexenes can be explained by its belonging to the category of funeral oration, and that it is not sufficient to demonstrate its not Platonic authorship. This hypothesis also seems to me to account for the feature that Kunchis uses as one of his main arguments for excluding the Melexenes from the corpus Platonicum, the frequency of chi. Indeed, the epidictic style is characterized by the stylistic device of paired expressions. This device consists in the recurrent use of synonymous pair, coordinated by chi or by tekai. This device is particularly evident in Gorgias and Commune of Helen, where it appears as early as the prologue. You have it here. And so I put in bold all the chi expression and underlined the paired expressions. The long accumulation in the second sentence is coordinated by 5 chi. Then the text contains 4 paired expressions, each containing 1 chi, and 1 tripled expression with 2 chi. The text therefore presents 12 chi for 122 words, which is much more than the average observed by Conches in the Melexenes, around 7 chi for 100 words. On average, the praise of Helen as a whole contains 6.7 chi for 100 words. Thus, the unusual frequency of chi noted by Conches can be explained as an imitation of Gorgias' style, which Plato would pastiche when he sets out to write a piece of epidictic eloquence. This hypothesis seems all the more likely to me, given that Plato engages in similar imitation in other parts of his work. within dialogues whose authenticity is not in question. Thus, in the Phaedrus, Plato imitates the Kai style in the prologue to Socrates' first speech, in the prologue to the Polynode, and at several points in the dialogue. So I put it in these slides with the percentage of Kais. So you have 26% of Kai in this passage. Once more, yeah. Then it's a prologue of the Polynode, 8.53% of Kai. And then with clearly this paired expression, apalen kai abaton, katokoke kai mania, etc. And in this small passage from the Polynode, 8 Kai for 80 words, so 10% of Kai. Opsin te kaitean, eidon te kaitelunto, holokleroi men otoentes kai apateis, etc., etc. Immediately after this last passage, Socrates connects stylistic emphasis with the emotional state inspired by recollection of the supracelestial world. Let's see, 5. Let this be our concession to memory, which has made me speak now at some length, macrotera eretai, out of longing for what was before. This mention of an affect as explaining the use of emphatical style allows to reinforce the intertextual link between Plato and Gorgias in this respect. In fact, Gorgias and the Platonic Phaedrus are associated by Aristotle in the Rhetoric, in a passage where he analyzes the relation between stylistic emphasis on emotion. Here's the text where Aristotle analyzes the link between emotion and emphatical style. Aristotle associates the emotion of the speaker and the audience with the use of a particular style marked by an abundance of figures borrowed from poetry. Among these figures, Aristotle gives an example of a paired expression coordinated by Kai and reinforced by an homoioteloton, themen de kaim nemen. You have this in the text. He distinguishes between two situations in which this style is used, either when the speaker and the audience are caught up in enthusiasm, or on the contrary, when the speaker adopts it ironically. Gorgias and the Phaedrus are examples of the latter use. For the Phaedrus, Aristotle is certainly thinking of the first passage quoted, the prologue of the first speech. In fact, immediately after this passage, Socrates interrupts himself and refers to the theon pathos, the divine affect he is experiencing. So the Aristotelian testimony suggests that Plato is borrowed consciously his pathetic style from Gorgias. So I conclude this inquiry saying that the frequency of Kai in the Menexenes does not, in my opinion, prove that the dialogue is not by Plato. It is specific to passages in which Plato adopts Gorgias' emphatic style, either ironically to parody it, as in Socrates' first speech in the Phaedrus, or without irony, as when he evokes the memory of the supracelestial world in the Polynode. In my view, the Menexenes belongs to the first category. Socrates, wanting to mock the grandiloquent style adopted by orators to flatter the Athenians during the funeral ceremony, pastiches it. This interpretation of the Menexenes style emerged when it is compared with stylistic unites that are inferior to the work as a whole, such as a speech within a dialogue or a passage from that speech, particularly the prologue or the peroration. Admittedly, these unites, due to their small number of words, are usually considered statistically irrelevant. Furthermore, as they are defined by the interpreter, they may be considered biased. However, in my opinion, they constitute the unite of production and reception of style. It is at the level of a passage that Plato chooses a particular style and that the reader perceives it. That is why, in my view, they must be taken into account. So I will stop here, and because there's too many time, just showing you the last diagrams about the Phaedrus, and maybe we can, yes. So this is the other inquiry we made, you have this Lysias work at the right and the Platonic work at the left, and the little blue point here is the Erotikos. And this is the same with the splitted text. So the Erotikos is here. You have to make it exactly here. You see it literally in the Lysias text. Yeah, you see it. Yes. I don't know how to make it zoom. Yes, it is here. Yeah. At the border between Platonic and Lysias works, and which would be interesting to show that Lysias' style is very consistent, and Platonic is consistent in the major part of it. And then, like a comet, he has its tail, you know. That is the poetic style of play. And I stop here. Thank you. If Constantin wants to add something, I see that he's here.
So first of all, thank you very much, André, for your presentation. It was very clear. Thank you for your question. Basically, we tried different transformation like PCA, TSNE, also like SVD, LDA, SCA, so linear and nonlinear. And basically, the transformation which were the cleanest were BCA and TSNE, which were presenting these clusters. And when I tried with LDA and ECA, we had much less information, and so this is the direction to, I think, to explore why PCA brings cleaner cluster than LDA or ECA. This is a good question, which we need to explore. But for now, I completely agree with André. And here we take the pictures that were giving us the most intuition.
Alrighty, our third speaker for this session is Tianrui Zhu from the Institute for Advanced Study of the Ancient World at NYU. She specializes in the archaeology of Central Asia and the Eurasian steppes. Her research explores how the steppes connected people and cultures and technologies across Eurasia using archaeological science and digital methods. She is currently conducting research on Eurasian connectivity and biomolecular archaeology while integrating digital technologies into her work. She is here today to present her paper titled Training Models, Training Humans, Building Egyptian Hieroglyph Recognition App through Student Hackathon, co-authored with her peers Manolis Mavromatis and Stefano Aprà, both of whom are also at the Institute for Advanced Study of the Ancient World. Please join me in welcoming her.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Ray. I'm a PhD student at the Institute for the Study of Ancient World at NYU. I'm presenting today a project that I undertook together with my two colleagues from ISAW, Manolis and Stefano, who are on Zoom today. So, unlike most of you here, or all of you here, I am not a classicist or philologist. I activate Iron Age nomadic tombs in the desert of Uzbekistan. And those guys did not have any writing, and I love them for that. But I came to the ancient world with some training in computer science and data science. And I'm always the annoying person who likes to look over like people's shoulder and be like, why are you not automating that? Why are you doing this manually? There's this shortcut and blah, blah, blah. So here's how I ended up organizing a coding competition for ancient Egyptian hieroglyph recognition, a language that I actually do not read. So being in a department that I saw that teaches Middle Egyptian and also around the corner of the mat makes two things very clear to me. First, Ancient Egyptian is super cool. There are all these cool birds that look the same at first glance, but they are all different alphabets. And learning it is extremely, extremely hard. So this is the beginner's Egyptian dictionary that's recommended to every beginner student. And it looks like this. Yeah, it's like hand-drawn. There is a typed dictionary, but it's in German. So my question is, naturally, can we just make a dictionary app, right? It would be so intuitive. So other pictographic languages like modern Chinese has already figured this out like 20 years ago or like longer. There has been a very efficient handwriting recognition algorithm out there and many dictionaries such as this one that you can download for free. And this is really useful for not just students, but sometimes scholars who need to look things up, like very obscure words. So why can't we make something like that for Egyptian? Because the technology already exists. The reality is that full-time humanities academics like us do not really have the time to build and maintain softwares by ourselves, or the capacity of following up with all the latest tools, such as this, and also the latest like machine learning algorithms. It's a pretty advanced view, and it updates every week. There's something out there. It's really hard for me to keep up, even with a background in computer science. And it's not just about building, but maintaining. So a software that I built as an undergrad, like 5 years ago, is still being used by this one guy called Julian. He's a Roman numismatist, right? And this is an app for Roman numismatics. I still get emails from Julian sometimes, and I would just let it sit in my inbox for like 10 days because I really don't want to touch it and evoke all these memories of debugging the software. Gives me a heart attack. But on the other end, tech professionals nowadays are super interested in archaeology and the ancient world. And a lot of them also have the need to build side projects for very high profile positions in tech. But they do not necessarily have the time to learn the very niche subjects of ancient studies, such as Middle Egyptian. So, to solve a problem like ancient Egyptian hieroglyph recognition, there needs to be someone beyond these two groups of people who is willing to learn and work from both sides. And we realize these are the undergrads. So the question now is, how do we bring these three groups of people together, right? That's how we decided to organize a hackathon, a competition where people build softwares within a very short period of time. So why did we choose to solve the problem through a hackathon rather than just hiring an undergraduate student? First, in this hackathon format, you don't just train one student, but you train a whole batch of students in both AI and in antiquity. And this is a really good talent discovery mechanism. So you find highly motivated students who are committed to both learning AI and learning antiquity. And hackathon is a very familiar format to STEM students and also to tech industry professionals. The hope is that, so a lot of hackathons do get industry funding from tech companies, and we didn't get any this time, but this is the hope. And this is a very efficient way of creating a working prototype within a very short time span, usually a week or less across a weekend. So here's our event called ArchaeoHack at a glance. We managed to get 17 undergraduate students, mostly in STEM majors. So most of them are like mathematics, computer science, or there are some economics majors. They group themselves into 5 teams. Each person is given a $20 AI allowance that they are able to buy any AI coding tools or tokens to develop the app. And to motivate them, we're giving them $100 cash prize for each person in the winning team. And we get them together to build this app for recognizing ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. So I would like to give you a timeline of the event. For about a month's time, we opened the application to NYU students across different New York campuses. We also, at the same time, look for people in the tech industry and also STEM PhD students across New York to act as volunteers and mentors. That means calling a lot of my friends. I eventually had to call my friends in Singapore who's working in the tech startup space, and some of them did agree to give a presentation on how to use AI, so that was great. The week before the hackathon, which happened on the weekend, so the week leading up to the weekend, we organized 3 online workshops on basically crash courses on AI, machine learning, and ancient Egyptian. So these are given by tech industry professionals, STEM PhD graduates, and a PhD student at ISAW who specialize in ancient Egyptian. So this is the hackathon weekend, is where everything happened. We have the 17 students come together and a group of mentors who gave them on-site help and troubleshooting assistance. The week after the competition, we conducted a rigorous round of judging, and on the Thursday afterwards, we had a round of presentation and an award-giving ceremony. So this is the winning team and their app. This is a very simple design, and this app involves like 2 main functions that we ask them to build. One is this is the most important one, is the drawing function. So on this app, you're able to draw one of the 24 Egyptian like the unilateral signs in Middle Egyptian, and the app will tell you what it is. Okay, so this team was very smart because they understand that they were not able to build a recognition app for 800 Egyptian signs within a weekend. They narrowed down the range, right, to this 24 unilateral signs, and they was able to make something really good for this 24 signs. So the model that this winning team adopted is it's called Teachable Machine. And it's a product by Google. I think everything here is free. So this is basically a pre-trained image classifier that you can apply on your own task. However, this is not technically the most sophisticated model. Other teams used all these other machine learning, like deep learning neural network algorithms. All these models are also pre-trained on image classification, but they involve sort of this final stage of fine-tuning, which appear to be pretty difficult for our students. So the team that actually adopted the most ready-to-use model actually won the competition because they were able to make it work within 2 days. There's also teams that chose to use the more traditional machine learning methods like the K-means algorithm. So beyond training models, this competition is also about training humans. So 2 components were really important for this. One is our workshop series that basically prepare them for the task in many aspects, and also the on-site mentoring that was extremely crucial for their success. Beyond having built an app that worked for ancient Egyptian, we also achieved some pedagogical goals. So after the competition, we asked the student to comment whether they have a better understanding of machine learning through this antiquity-themed competition, and most of them say yes. And we also asked them, are you more interested in archaeology after this? And also most of them say yes. By the way, there is a no option. No one chose that. So for future development, we are not stopping just here with a prototype that works for 24 Science. We want to develop a full app that will work for the 800 Science. So to do that, we will seek institutional funding. We will hire the winner as undergraduate research assistants. We'll keep providing this both technical and also Egyptology specific mentoring. And our goal is to publish the final app as an open source app, free to download, and also write a publication together with the student. Of course, the eventual goal is to deploy it in classroom. ISAW is a good place to start, but there are also other institutions that teach Middle Egyptian that can possibly benefit from this. And this is a slightly more technical goal of this. That is, we want to create a language agnostic training pipeline, not just for Egyptian, but for other hieroglyphic languages. Ancient Mayan being something, this is something really complicated, but something that we want to try to adapt our model for. So zooming out from ArchaeoHack 2025, I want to present to you the hackathon model as a way for this interdisciplinary collaboration between tech and antiquity. So this is how I conceptualize this space, the research space within this intersection. There are very high level, very niche research happening at this intersection that is led by experts in STEM, led by experts in antiquity studies that typically create sort of breakthrough in both STEM and antiquity, right? So this kind of project will let both sides to publish on high-ranking journals. And they typically involve a big budget and then a long duration. And this is, I think, a very small subset of projects. And because it's really hard to find a project that will make breakthrough in both sides. I think a lot of us here work on such projects. On the mid-level, slightly less technical, there are projects where a very proficient tech person will be able to tackle in collaboration with antiquity scholar. For example, we're going to hear about the OpenAI to Z challenge later. I think this is a great example of such projects. But what we are really tackling here is this section at the bottom of the pyramid. Right? I think there's a lot of potential projects out there that are theoretically solvable and like theoretically easy to solve, and they do not necessarily help to generate new research insights, but can save people a lot of time. So for example, this dictionary app, it doesn't provide new insights into Middle Egyptian, but it does help a student or scholar to learn or do their work much faster. And these projects require a relatively smaller budget and has a quick turnaround time. So Hackathon, I think, is a very good model to address this pool of potential research questions. Beyond philology, I want to sort of go back to archaeology, which is my home domain. There are a lot of problems related to digitization, labeling, and identification in archaeological fieldwork and the follow-up analysis. So we do spend a lot of time in the field, but I think we spend way more time doing the documentation in the lab and after the field season. And these are tasks such as digitizing all the ceramic drawings of all the shirts. You know, can think about how much time that involves. Identifying animal bones or parts of human skeleton, or creating stratigraphic profiles in a publishable format that also takes a long time. So I think there's a lot of potential for our future hackathons to address a lot of these problems in archaeology. Okay, here I would like to give shout out to my co-organizers and all the volunteers who are involved in this project, and as well as our institutional sponsors. They are NYU ISAW, Archeo Hub, which is a network of archaeologists across NYU, the Office for Teaching Excellence and Innovation, as well as NYU Libraries. If you're interested in further information, we have a website here. This is also built by AI, really cool. And we can be contacted via this email. And if you would like to try the app yourself, I have it installed on my machine and you can try afterwards. Thank you so much.